Okay, I am back with this book. This is Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. I mentioned at the end of my last video that I would be doing Ulysses next, but I'm still working through Ulysses. So Blood Meridian is one of my, well, I'd say my favorite book. So I decided I'd do a video on this one. And hopefully by the end of it you can see why it's my favorite book. This is the Folio Society edition. It is gorgeous. I mean, the art is, well, it's really disturbing, but it's also very pretty. Let's see if I can get the whole, yeah. It's got some illustrations inside. I promise all my books don't have pictures. I mean, my Faust did, and this book does, but it's not all my books. So, if you are familiar with this book, then you may know how it relates to the name of my channel, Evening Redness Lit. The subtitle of this book is The Evening Redness in the West. It's actually not in this edition, interestingly enough. It just says Blood Meridian, but the whole title is Blood Meridian or The Evening Redness in the West. And that's a kind of a reference to Moby Dick. That book has a subtitle as well. It's Moby Dick or The Whale. I'd love to do a video on that at some point too. So with this edition, like I said, it's very well made. It comes with this nice black box slipcase. Is that what it's called? With red on the inside. It's very nicely made. But I could not wholeheartedly recommend it to somebody because there are some typos in this version that I did not have in the version I read first. That was a paperback I read, but this one has a couple typos in it that I didn't see in the other version, which is unfortunate. But like I said, it's a very beautiful book. The illustrations are really cool. Okay, so this book is about a gang of scalp hunters in the 1850s under a man named John Joel Glanton. It's a real historical group of people. They were hired by the state of, I believe, Chihuahua in Mexico and in Texas to collect Apache scalps. Sorry, I should warn, this video is going to be pretty disturbing because this book's pretty disturbing. But they were they were trying to make way for the settlers in the West, and so the government hired them and other groups as well to kill indigenous people and take their scalps as proof. And this book follows their journey as they sink further and further into depravity and violence, and they start killing innocent people. And I heard someone describe this book as a nightmare once, and I think that's very accurate. It feels very nightmarish reading through it. I've also heard someone describe it, I believe, as looking out on the apocalypse through a stained glass window. I think that was Better Than Food that said something like that. That YouTube channel had a video on this book. I mean, he's right. It's disturbing, it's violent, it's horrible, but it's told in such beautiful prose that it's kind of hard to look away. So when I first read this book, I was on a 5-week road trip with my girlfriend, and we were driving around the country in the US, hitting a bunch of different national parks. And so I was reading this book out in the West, and in Yellowstone, and Grand Tetons, up and down the California coast. Well, down the California coast, I guess. So Joshua Tree in the desert. It was really an incredible experience, and I was a bit afraid that tainted my experience of it, as in I thought it was better than it was, but then I read it again in, well, the room where I normally read things, and I liked it even more the second time. This is a very American book in that it's about, the American settlers' conquest and genocide of the Native Americans, but it's also a very universal book about the nature of mankind and propensity for war. One of these epigraphs here, the last one I'll read you, it says, Clark, who led last year's expedition to the Afar region of northern Ethiopia, and UC Berkeley colleague Tim D. White also said that a re-examination of a 300,000-year-old fossil skull found in the same region earlier shows evidence of having been scalped. That's from the Yuma Daily Sun. The idea basically being scalpings and therefore violence, human-on-human violence, or hominid-on-hominid violence, has been going on for as long as we've been around, essentially. If you haven't read any Cormac McCarthy, I would say that while this is my favorite book by him, and I think my favorite book in general, I would not say this is the best place to start. First ones I read were No Country for Old Men and The Road, and those are both incredible books and a bit more accessible. All the Pretty Horses is also a great, beautiful book that's a little easier to get into than this one. Finally, before I start getting into the quotes I've chosen to talk about, there is a publication called Notes on Blood Meridian by John Sepik, and that is essentially a study on the historical factuality of Blood Meridian, the symbology, all the references to other forms of literature. I mean, it's a very comprehensive look into this book. It's so rich. There's so much going on. I really can't talk about it all, but yeah, we'll probably talk about some of those things as we start going through the quotes. But I think without further ado, I can get into the quotes. So the first quote I chose was literally page 1, the first sentence. And you'll see under each chapter heading there's summaries, essentially, what goes on in each chapter, and that's a reference to the 1850s literature, 1800s literature at the time. That was a thing that was done. It's an interesting just parallel to that time. So I'll read you the first passage. See the child. He is pale and thin. He wears a thin and ragged linen shirt. He stokes the scullery fire. Outside lie dark-turned fields with rags of snow, and darker woods beyond that harbor yet a few last wolves. His folk are known for hewers of wood and drawers of water, but in truth his father has been a schoolmaster. He lies in drink, he quotes from poets whose names are now lost. The boy crouches by the fire and watches him. Night of your birth, 33. The Leonids they were called. God, how the stars did fall. I looked for blackness, holes in the heavens, the dipper stove. The mother dead these 14 years did incubate in her own bosom the creature who would carry her off. The father never speaks her name, the child does not know it. He has a sister in this world that he will not see again. He watches, pale and unwashed. He can neither read nor write, and in him broods already a taste for mindless violence. All history present in that visage, the child, the father of the man. Yeah. The kid in this book, he's literally just called the kid. He doesn't have a name. Is such an interesting character. He's likened a lot to Ishmael in Moby Dick. Ishmael. And a lot of this book parallels Moby Dick. Someone pointed out, I saw recently online, See the Child, Call Me Ishmael. Both of those books have a 3-word first sentence. I think it's very powerful. He has a father who's a schoolmaster who quotes ancient poetry, but the kid doesn't know how to read or write. The Leonids are a meteor shower event that was historical in its intensity. You looked for blackness, holes in the heavens. That was apparently really the experience of people who lived through that event. Leo is the astrological sign associated. It's one of them associated with fire. And the kid being born on a meteor shower kind of foreshadows the chaotic, almost apocalyptic course of his life. I mean, there's so much to pull apart here. He already In him broods a taste for mindless violence. All history present in that visage, the child, the father of the man. The child, the father of the man is a phrase that basically means the way you grow up kind of predicts how you're going to be as an adult. The child literally creates the man. So the kid runs away, and we get some stuff, some almost not really a montage, but of him traveling and fighting and getting into trouble. I didn't mark this quote, but I do really like this passage. The child's face is curiously untouched behind the scars, the eyes oddly innocent. Let me get that. They fight with fists, with feet, with bottles or knives, all races, all breeds, men whose speech sounds like the grunting of apes, men from lands so far and queer that standing over them where they lie bleeding in the mud, he feels mankind itself vindicated. So this is clearly a sign of how closed-minded and small his world is, and it foreshadows his ability to other the people he's hurting. So from lands so far and queer, he feels mankind itself vindicated. He feels that he and people like him are the representatives of mankind. And that's a really dangerous way of thinking. That's how you get people who are okay with genocide, either participating in it or just observing it. Down here it says, "Only now is the child finally divested of all that he has been. His origins are become remote, as is his destiny, and not again in all the world's turning will there be terrain so wild and barbarous to try whether the stuff of creation may be shaped to man's will, or whether his own heart is not another kind of clay." He's divested of all that he has been. He's fully separated from his family. His father, who's, from what we can tell, hasn't really done much good for him. The sister he won't see again. His mother is dead. He doesn't have anything. His origins are become remote, as is his destiny. I think that speaks to the chaos that he's been being tossed into. He's not really in control here. He's not the one deciding his destiny. And this book asks that question a lot, is what is destiny? Who decides that? It doesn't give an answer, of course, but and then finally, terrain so wild and barbarous to try whether the stuff in creation may be shaped to man's will, or whether his own heart is not another kind of clay. I love this line because it asks if human beings, mankind, if we are something special in this world, or if we're just another entity to be acted upon. It's free will. Do we have free will? Are humans special? Okay, moving on. If you notice, I used all red tabs this time, for obvious reasons, I think. I think it looks good. That's about it. So here he is. He's been traveling and he's found a little hermit's hovel, and the hermit's invited him in. And the hermit, who is dirt poor, I mean the kid is dirt poor, but this guy's dirt poor. He's feeding him and giving him somewhere to stay. But he says here, can I get that on the camera to show? Okay. "A man's at odds to know his mind, 'cause his mind is aught he has to know it with. He can know his heart, but he don't want to. Rightly so. Best not to look in there. It ain't the heart of a creature that is bound in the way that God has set for it. You can find meanness in the least of creatures, but when God made man, the devil was at his elbow. A creature that can do anything. Make a machine, and a machine to make the machine. An evil that can run itself 1,000 years. No need to tend it. You believe that?" The kid says, "I don't know." And he says, "Believe that." You may notice if you've never read Cormac McCarthy, he doesn't use quotation marks. So it's just a little stylistic quirk. I like it, but it can get a little confusing sometimes. So this quote, again, questioning the nature of humanity, it talks about, I guess, questions the divinity. Right? In the Bible it says that humans were made in God's image, but here it's claiming that the devil had a huge part in making humans the way they are. The big thing that sets us apart is our minds, our consciousness, as far as we know, right? We don't know if animals are conscious in a similar way, but that's what we think. We think that humans have a unique capacity for forethought and a unique capacity to contemplate morality, which he's claiming here makes it so that humans are the only ones who can really enact evil in the world. We don't say that, a wolf is evil for killing a deer because a wolf has instincts and needs to eat, but a human can kill another human simply for cruelty's sake. And I do think there's actually examples in the animal kingdom. Dolphins and chimps are smart enough that they will kill things or hurt things for fun. I know orcas have they have hunting games that they'll flip seals around and ostensibly cause more harm than is necessary, whatever that means. But this is, it's saying that the devil had more to do with humans than God, which I think a lot of classic literature does not have good stuff to say about Christianity. Maybe that could be a whole video, I think. This one, so the kids joined up, I believe at this point, with a company of filibusters, an army basically. He's under Captain White, but they have a night to go into town, and they're going to go to a bar and drink. And this quote down here just says, they were in good spirits, scrubbed and combed, clean shirts all, each foreseeing a night of drink, perhaps of love. How many youths have come home cold and dead from just such nights and just such plans? One thing that makes this book really cool is the distance that the narrator has. It's very non-judgmental. It shows you what's happening and lets you form your own opinions about it. But there are several cases where the narrator is a bit more active. Here he seems to be judging them for making stupid mistakes. How many youths have come home cold and dead from just such nights and just such plans? He seems to be lamenting it. In the first sentence of the book, see the child, that's a command. It's not a declaration. It's imperative. Just like Call Me Ishmael, another link there. I just think that's a very interesting shift in the narrative style for a second. So they're in the bar here, and there's a Mennonite who notices them and knows who they're with, and he has something to say about it. It says, the Mennonite watches the enshadowed dark before them as it is reflected to him in the mirror over the bar. He turns to them. His eyes are wet. He speaks slowly. The wrath of God lies sleeping. It was hid 1,000,000 years before men were, and only men have power to wake it. Hell ain't half full. Hear me. You carry war of a madman's making onto a foreign land, you'll wake more than the dogs. But they berated the old man and swore at him until he moved off down the bar muttering, and how else could it be? I could just read the rest of this chapter too, but it's incredible writing. But we have this Mennonite here who, back to Moby Dick, parallels the scene where Elijah tells Ishmael not to get on the boat with Captain Ahab. He's Elijah is the name of a prophet in the Bible, but in Moby Dick he plays the role of, I guess, also a prophet, and he warns Ishmael not to go. And the Mennonite here plays that same role. It's a very direct, I would say a direct reference to that. And I just love how he talks. The wrath of God lies sleeping. And here again we get that same idea that was being talked about by the hermit. It was hid 1,000,000 years before men were, and only men have power to wake it. Again, a wolf or a lion cannot wake the wrath of God because they don't have the foresight or the cognitive power, the conscience that a human has to sin or violate God's laws, whatever those laws are. It's that same idea. Which one's next? Okay. Oh, there's my stomach. Oh no. I just pulled out my tab. Oh, yeah, okay. Okay, well. So I found the passage, and this stuck with me the first time I read it. Just the imagery here is beautiful. It's scary. It's unsettling. All night sheet lightning quaked sourceless to the west beyond the midnight thunderheads, making a bluish day of the distant desert, the mountains on the sudden skyline stark and black and livid like a land of some other order out there whose true geology was not stone but fear. I mean, not only is it such vivid imagery, the mountains on the sudden skyline stark and black and livid, but this a land of some other order whose true geology was not stone but fear. I think this is speaking, in my opinion, this is speaking directly to the American history of violence. This land that's so steeped in a violent history. I mean, this is set in the 1850s. We had slavery going on, the genocide of indigenous people, all of it. All those institutions that essentially America is founded on. I think that's the land he's talking about. That's not stone but fear. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, though. I'll try not to pull another tab out. So here, actually, it's been a minute since I read this, but here's just something that I think really summarizes the kid's character, or I guess tries to explain, the path that he ends up on. Someone says, someone who mostly speaks Spanish, so it's in broken English. It says, when the lambs is lost in the mountain, he said, they is cry. Sometime come the mother, sometime the wolf. To me, this is about how if you have a child who's in a difficult situation, let's say abusive or neglectful parents or no home life at all, their life can turn out entirely differently based on who they find their way to. In this case, the kid finds his way to the gang of scalp hunters, and this taste for mindless violence has a chance to incubate and turn into something truly despicable. If someone had found him and loved and cared for him, then maybe he would be a different person altogether. It's very sad. It's a very sad story, and I'm sure there's many like it. Here's another example of just the prose and the imagery that I love. They're just in a small little town in Mexico. It's very poor, and so it's describing here two starving dogs. It says, the dogs stood tail to tail. Two other dogs sat a little apart, squatting loosely in their skins. Just frames of dogs in napless hides, watching the coupled dogs and then watching the prisoners clanking away up the street. all lightly shimmering in the heat, these life forms, like wonders much reduced. Rough likenesses thrown up at hearsay after the things themselves had faded in men's minds. So we're kind of building this apocalyptic landscape. A lot of this feels like the world has already ended. Rough likenesses after the things themselves had already faded. It's kind of the opposite of a Platonic ideal, right? The idea of a Platonic Plato's world of forms, being that for everything that exists, there is a world of forms in which that thing exists in perfection, in its most perfect form. So you could say that the dogs, if they exist in the world of forms, would be perfect, healthy, strong, fast. But these dogs are kind of the opposite of that. They are what is left after really everything that makes them dogs is taken away. I don't know if I'm saying that right. It seems as if we have entered a world in which nothing can exist in its perfect form. The land is too steeped in violence and fear and hatred for anything to reach its fulfillment. But I also just think it's perfect. It's very physical, tactile imagery. Just more beautiful prose. They were about in the morning before daybreak, and they caught up and saddled their mounts as soon as it was light enough to see. The jagged mountains were pure blue in the dawn, and everywhere birds twittered, and the sun, when it rose, caught the moon in the west, so that they lay opposed to each other across the earth, the sun white-hot and the moon a pale replica, as if they were ends of a common bore beyond whose terminals burned worlds past all reckoning. I've thought about this passage a lot, and I haven't really decided what I think it means. Again, we have that kind of apocalyptic imagery, worlds past all reckoning. If this is what's in this world, imagine what could be out there. Yeah, let me know if you have any thoughts on that. If you've read the book or haven't read it, I'm just curious what that means to you. I forgot to mention, I did get some very nice comments on my last video, and a few people subscribed, so that was really nice. I didn't expect anyone to watch it, but I appreciate the comments. If you commented or watched it, thank you, and I hope you like this one too. Okay. This is an encounter they have with the Apache, and this is from the Glanton gang's perspective and the kids' perspective. So we have this kind of hellish image of these riders appearing. It says, the riders were beginning to appear far out on the lake bed, a thin frieze of mounted archers that trembled and veered in the rising heat. They crossed before the sun and vanished one by one and reappeared again, and they were black in the sun, and they rode out of that vanished sea like burnt phantoms with the legs of the animals kicking up the spume that was not real, and they were lost in the sun and lost in the lake, and they shimmered and slurred together and separated again, and they augmented by planes and lurid avatars and began to coalesce, and there began to appear above them in the dawn-broached sky a hellish likeness of their ranks riding huge and inverted, and the horses' legs incredibly elongate, trampling down the high thin surface, and the howling anti-warriors pendant from their mounts immense and chimeric, and the high wild cries carrying that flat and barren pan like the cries of souls broke through some misweave in the weft of things into the world below. That's a long sentence. But the image of heat distortion and the sun and reflections off the hard pan and the lake, the howling anti-warriors pendant from their mounts, to me it's breathtaking. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say about it, but I just love this passage. So if you know anything about this book, you will know that the most talked about part of it is the character Judge Holden, or the Judge. He's one of the greatest villains in the history of fiction, I believe, but discussion around him is often pretty shallow and just about how scary and monstrous he is. But he's a very erudite man. He has a lot to say. He has a very scary philosophy. So the members of the gang try to have discussions with him about his philosophy. It says, a few would quote him scripture to confound his ordering up of eons out of the ancient chaos and other apostate supposings. The Judge smiled. Books lie, he said. God don't lie. No, said the Judge, he does not. And these are his words. He held up a chunk of rock. He speaks in stones and trees, the bones of things. God don't lie, he says. I mean, there's so many examples of people asking God what to do. But here the Judge is saying, if God speaks, it is in the world he's created. And to the Judge, this means that, there's no limits. Mankind is meant to fight and kill and destroy and wage war, and there's nothing on this earth to suggest that God has any problem with that. He speaks in stones and trees, the bones of things. The squatters in their rags nodded among themselves, and were soon reckoning him correct, this man of learning, in all his speculations, and this the Judge encouraged until they were right proselytes of the new order, whereupon he laughed at them for fools. He has this uncanny ability, the Judge does, to make people follow him. There's the scene where he's introduced is a direct reference to Paradise Lost. The gang kind of finds him in the middle of nowhere, sitting on a rock, as if he just appeared there, and they're running from Apache, and they're out of gunpowder. And the Judge essentially takes command of them and shows them how to make gunpowder, which, if you read Milton's Paradise Lost, is about Satan and his army. So in Paradise Lost, Satan teaches the fallen angels, his army, how to make gunpowder and cannons for the war against the angels. And apparently, I have not read Paradise Lost, that is on my list, but the Judge's speech that he makes in that chapter is heavily inspired by Satan's in that book, in Paradise Lost. So here's one of the illustrations. I don't know how well it is coming across on camera, but I believe I skipped over one too, but you can see that real quick. Oh yeah. The kid looking at Captain White's head in the jar. So the Glanton gang has just stopped at a fort to rest, and there's a bunch of people already there who are wounded and dying and hungry. And there's one man who's dying by a fire, and he is singing. As the Glanton gang rides out, this is what it says. The dying man by the ashes of the fire was singing, and as they rode out they could hear the hymns of their childhood, and they could hear them as they ascended the arroyo and rode up through the low junipers still wet from the rain. The dying man sang with great clarity and intention, and the riders setting forth up country may have ridden more slowly the longer to hear him, for they were of just these qualities themselves. I think this is a really heartbreaking moment of humanity, because we've seen them enact a lot of violence, and it's really easy to forget that all these people were once children. They heard the hymns of their childhood. They were all once kids sitting in church, probably with their parents, and they become merciless killers. But the men sang with great clarity and intention. The men were of just these qualities themselves, clarity and intention. They were children, and they were innocent at one point, but now there's no mistaking what mission they're on. They're on a mission to kill people, murder people, a lot of innocent people. Yeah, I mean, the humanity of murderers is a contentious topic, I think. It's really easy to say, oh, he was an inhuman monster. I think about serial killers of modern day. But the scary thing, as we've talked about with the hermit's speech, is that every human being who's ever committed an atrocious, unspeakable act is a human being, just like you and me. Cormac McCarthy has another book called Child of God that centers on a very despicable, disturbing person. But that the famous line, he says, he was a child of God, much like yourself perhaps, asking us to identify with him. It's very hard to identify with the characters in Blood Meridian, but this book, I think, does ask us to do that, to see ourselves in them, to see the capacity for violence in ourselves. So here, this next quote I've chosen, the judge has told a tale, a story of a traveler and a harness maker, and honestly it's best experienced reading it yourself, so I'm not going to go into all the details, but basically someone is killed, a father is killed. So it says here, it talks about the issue of fatherhood, and it's obviously referencing the kid here, but I'll just read it. Now the son, whose father's existence in the world is historical and speculative, even before the son has entered it, is in a bad way. All his life he carries before him the idol of a perfection to which he can never attain. The father dead has euchred the son out of his patrimony, for it is the death of the father to which the son is entitled, and to which he is heir more so than his goods. He will not hear of the small mean ways that tempered the man in life. He will not see him struggling in follies of his own devising. No, the world which he inherits bears him false witness. He is broken before a frozen God, and he will never find his way. This idea that, I mean, your mother and father, your parents are who you're supposed to look up to. Young boys often look up to their fathers, especially at this time, 1850s. The saying that if you don't have this role model figure, if he is dead before you're born, you can never have the opportunity to see him as a human. You know, when I was a kid, I idolized my parents, and then when you get older, you come to realize that they're just people, just like you. And so if you have a parent who dies, a parent you look up to who dies, and you don't get the chance to know them, then they'll always be that image of perfection. And we can relate this to the kid, not because his father's literally dead, but because it seems like he never really got to know his father. His mother died giving birth to him, and so he has no real role model, and that's what makes him so susceptible to being brought into this world of violence. The kid now has been separated in an attack, and so he's wandering the desert by himself, trying to find his way back to the gang. And so it's here at night, and he's by himself. It says, "It grew colder, and the night lay long before him. He kept moving, following in the darkness the naked chines of rock blown bare of snow. The stars burned with a lidless fixity, and they drew nearer in the night, until toward dawn he was stumbling among the windstones of the uttermost ridge to heaven, a barren range of rock so enfolded in that gaudy house that stars lay awash at his feet, and migratory spalls of burning matter crossed constantly about him on their chartless reckonings. In the pre-dawn light he made his way out upon a promontory, and there received first of any creature in that country the warmth of the sun's ascending." The imagery in this book is so powerful. He's walking among the windstones of the uttermost ridge to heaven. And the fact that the light hits him first, I mean, it's a physical reality, right? He's up higher than most living things, but very symbolic in that despite his immorality, the monster he's become, we do see later in the book he does attempt to make up for this. And we'll talk more about that later. But it's very interesting foreshadowing the light upon him and essentially stumbling through heaven. And here might be just my favorite passage in the book. So he's another night out alone by himself, and he's freezing. He will freeze to death if he doesn't find warmth or shelter. Now, I have read that there's enough detail and specificity in this book to determine the dates at which most things happen, like exact dates. I believe the Leonids meteor shower on which the kid was born happened on November 22nd, 1853. I'll correct this in the editing if it's wrong, but basically some people have been able to determine that this scene that I'm about to read you occurs very late Christmas Eve or very early Christmas morning, December 25th. It was a lone tree burning on the desert, a heraldic tree that the passing storm had left afire. The solitary pilgrim drawn up before it had traveled far to be here, and he knelt in the hot sand and held his numbed hands out, while all about in that circle attended companies of lesser auxiliaries, routed forth into the inordinate day, small owls that crouched silently and stood from foot to foot, and tarantulas and sulpugas and vinegaroons and the vicious mygale spiders, and beaded lizards with mouths black as a chow dog's, deadly to man, and the little desert basilisks that jet blood from their eyes, and the small sand vipers like seemly gods, silent and the same, in Jeddah, in Babylon. A constellation of ignited eyes that edged the ring of light, all bound in a precarious truce before this torch whose brightness had set back the stars in their sockets. I was stunned the first time I read that. But let's talk about it. Let's pick it apart a little bit. So the most obvious reference to me is the burning bush in Exodus. Moses finding God in the form of the burning bush. But it's not a bush; it's a tree, which might say something, or he might not have wanted to be too on the nose. But this kind of encounter with divinity is implicit here. The fact that all these animals, it lists all these deadly desert animals who are there, predator and prey, and they're not attacking each other, they're not fighting or running from each other, they're all gathered before this heraldic tree because they need the warmth. They're engaged in a precarious truce. It calls the kid a solitary pilgrim. Pilgrims are traveling in search of usually a holy land or a religious sanctuary, right, where they can practice their religion. So what does that say about the kid? This kid who has murdered and participated in genocide, but he's also enacted various acts of kindness throughout the book that we don't see from any of the other gang members. And then this torch whose brightness had set back the stars in their sockets. I mean, I think for one that literally refers to, when you look at a bright light at nighttime, it takes a while for your eyes to adjust, and then if you turn that light off, you can't really see the dimmer things anymore. So they probably literally cannot see the stars anymore because the brightness of the fire is so much. But set back the stars in their sockets. Again, I think this is also imposing upon them a kind of reverence. Yeah. Again, there's more to say about this. I'm having trouble getting my thoughts together, but please, let me know what you think about that. I keep saying that. Someone's going to point that out, that I keep saying, let me know what you think about that. That's the whole reason I'm making this video. Let me know what you think about that. Okay. You also don't have to let me know. It's up to you, the viewer. It's up to you if you don't want to let me know what you think about that. Okay, sorry. Here we go. They're camping again. there's a lot of plot details you're missing, and just don't worry about that. If you want to read the book, I totally recommend it. But right now we're just here to appreciate the prose and the messages, themes, I guess. So here's describing just a campfire, a normal campfire. You know, how many times have you seen a campfire, either in real life, in a movie or a show, whatever? You read it in a book. It's usually not very interesting, but here it says, the flames sawed in the wind, and the embers paled and deepened, like the blood beat of some living thing eviscerate upon the ground before them. And they watched the fire, which does contain within it something of men themselves, inasmuch as they are less without it, and are divided from their origins, and are exiles. For each fire is all fires, the first fire and the last to ever be. There's a recurring theme in McCarthy novels where there's only one story, and that's the story of the world. You know, the story of humankind on the earth. Every story ever told is just a subset of that story. An episode from that story, you might say. So here it's saying the same about fires. You know, each fire is all fires. And it also likens it to the men, right? It says that men are not, they don't really exist without fire, right? Calling back to our evolutionary history, possibly, right? When humans harnessed fire, that was a huge moment for us. Go team. But it could also be calling back to, like, again, the fire in Exodus, the burning bush, the pillar of fire that the Israelites followed through the desert. So there's no philosophy of the world that does not include fire as a crucial component. And, you know, the imagery of the fire being a living thing eviscerate upon the ground, I mean, it says that of these men, maybe of all men, right? The core of our being, the thing that allowed us to become what we are, fire, is violent. And by comparing it to a thing eviscerated upon the ground, it likens the act of making a fire to an act of violence. And I don't think it literally means that lighting a fire is violent. There's plenty of legitimate reasons, but it just harkens back to that point of violence being inherent in human nature, a part of us just as much as our conscience and creativity, the divine spark, you might say. So actually the next one is further down on this page. The judge is saying this. It says, "The truth about the world," he said, "is that anything is possible. Had you not seen it all from birth and thereby bled it of its strangeness, it would appear to you for what it is. A hat trick in a medicine show, a fevered dream, a trance bepopulate with chimeras having neither analogue nor precedent, an itinerant carnival, a migratory tent show, whose ultimate destination, after many a pitch in many a mudded field, is unspeakable and calamitous beyond reckoning." If you read John Sepik's notes on Blood Meridian, he talks a lot about how Gnosticism weaves in to this book. A lot of people say the judge is a direct representation of a demiurge, which in Gnosticism is a divine figure that's come to earth to sow chaos and pain amongst people. But what he's saying here is that, I honestly, I can read this with a little bit of... You could almost, if it were not the judge saying it, you could read the first part almost as a condemnation of genocide. Hear me out here. I know. The judge is like, he loves genocide and war, but the truth about the world, he said, is that anything is possible. Had you not seen it all from birth and thereby bled it of its strangeness, it would appear to you for what it is. To me, it could be saying that the ethnocentrism, where your culture is the default culture and everything else is weird and strange, right? Americans have this problem with foreign names, right? They'll hear an African name, or maybe just a name that's not in English, and they'll say, "Oh, what a weird name," but it's only weird because that's not what we experienced, and billions of people around the world do experience cultures other than our own. So I don't think that's literally what the judge is saying, but I think that is something that you could get out of it. More broadly speaking, he's just talking about the nature of reality, and how everything is just like the human mind can get used to anything. And I really love the end here. A migratory tent show whose ultimate destination after many a pitch in many a mudded field is unspeakable and calamitous beyond reckoning. Your life involves necessarily a lot of suffering, and at the end of all that suffering, you will die. That's an inescapable fact, and it's a very cynical, pessimistic point of view. McCarthy, I think, has a very cynical view about the world, but I think what I love about him is that it's not cynical without purpose. He believes that the world is a very harsh and horrible place, but in all of his books there's always this kind of statement that life is worth it. It's in the end a hopeful message that there are reasons to live in the world, even as calamitous as this one. Here's another illustration, I think. I'm not going to tell you what happens there. There's been a lot of spoilers in this video, but I'll save some things. Again, just more really wonderful prose here. He rose and turned toward the lights of the town. The tide pools bright as smelter pots among the dark rocks where the phosphorescent scarabs clambered back. Passing through the salt grass, he looked back. The horse had not moved. A ship's light winked in the swells. The colt stood against the horse with its head down, and the horse was watching, out there past men's knowing, where the stars are drowning and whales ferry their vast souls through the black and seamless sea. I think anytime he talks about whales, he's thinking about Moby Dick. I really don't know what to say about that, but I just love it. I guess I have one thing to say about it. The colt was watching out there past men's knowing. I think this implies that animals may have more knowledge than we give them credit for. In some ways, animals may know more than humans. I don't know. So the Glanton gang has broken up. The kid is, we've skipped some time, he's now known as the Man. And he can't stop thinking about the judge. The judge tried to kill him at some point. And I think when you interact with a character like that, someone so, I don't even know, just, well, we'll get to that. There's actually a quote I know coming up that we can talk about that. No, it's this quote. Okay. So the kid's having a dream, or the man, I guess. In that sleep, and in sleeps to follow, the judge did visit. Who would come other? A great shambling mutant, silent and serene. Whatever his antecedents, he was something wholly other than their sum, nor was there system by which to divide him back into his origins, for he would not go. Whoever would seek out his history, through what unraveling of loins and ledger books, must stand at last darkened and dumb at the shore of a void, without terminus or origin, and whatever science he might bring to bear upon the dusty primal matter blowing down out of the millennia, will discover no trace of any ultimate atavistic egg by which to reckon his commencing. Atavistic meaning essential, or having to do with the origin of something. So the judge here, this book is also inspired by a book called My Confession by Samuel Chamberlain. This was an autobiography about written by a person about his real experience riding with the Glanton Gang. And there really was a person in that autobiography named Judge Holden, who was a lot like the book Holden, different in some ways. But what McCarthy's saying here about the judge is that, you can go back to his historical precedent. You can call him a demiurge, right? You can say that he's a representation of colonialism or imperialism, a manifest destiny. But at the end of the day, he's not going to fit into any of those narrow definitions, because he's the synthesis of all of them and more. I think that's very fitting for a character like the judge. I would love to make a more in-depth video on the judge. I have more to say about him. Plenty of people have talked about him already. I just don't. If you might be interested in that, let me know. Let me know what you think. If you might be interested in that, because he is a fascinating character. I forgot to mark this passage, but I really love it. This is a perfect example of the kid showing kindness and attempting to make up for what he's done in the past. Participating in all the horrible things the Glanton Gang did. So he finds a scene of a bunch of murdered people, and everyone seems to be dead, but it says, "The kid rose and looked about at this desolate scene, and then he saw alone and upright in a small niche in the rocks an old woman kneeling in a faded rebozo with her eyes cast down. He made his way among the corpses and stood before her. She was very old, and her face was gray and leathery, and sand had collected in the folds of her clothing. She did not look up. The shawl that covered her head was much faded of its color, yet it bore like a patent, woven into the fabric, the figures of stars and quarter moons and other insignia of a provenance unknown to him. He spoke to her in a low voice. He told her that he was an American, and that he was a long way from the country of his birth, and that he had no family, and that he had traveled much and seen many things, and had been at war and endured hardships. He told her that he would convey her to a safe place, some party of her country people, who would welcome her, and that she should join them, for he could not leave her in this place, or she would surely die. He knelt on one knee, resting the rifle before him like a staff. "Abuelita," he said, "no puedes escucharme?" He reached into the little cove and touched her arm. She moved slightly, her whole body light and rigid. She weighed nothing. She was just a dried shell, and she had been dead in that place for years. Firstly, it's just such a heartbreaking and chilling image. The kid comes and he finds this woman, and he's talking to her, trying to tell her who he is and what he's been through. And I think for himself, he lacks anyone to he doesn't have anyone to talk to. So there's just all this trauma and horror in him, and he's telling her about these things and all the things he's seen because he has to tell somebody. And the fact that he tries to help her and she's been dead for years and years, I interpreted that as maybe it being too late for the kid to change. This act of kindness he attempts, it's too late for these people. This old woman is dead and has been for years. I don't know what else to say about it. It's just, it's chilling. Yeah. So the judge finds the man again in a bar, and he's proselytizing to him again. That he can't help spewing his philosophy. The judge, "A man seeks his own destiny and no other," said the judge, "will or nill. Any man who could discover his own fate and elect therefore some opposite course could only come at last to that self-same reckoning at the same appointed time. For each man's destiny is as large as the world he inhabits, and contains within it all opposites as well. This desert upon which so many have been broken is vast and calls for largeness of heart, but it is also ultimately empty. It is hard, it is barren, its very nature is stone." So from the judge's point of view, fate is fixed. There's nothing you can do about it. Even if you knew about it, you would just lead yourself right back to the same fate. That's how fate works. That's a very deterministic, fatalist point of view. I don't believe in that. My interpretation of this is that we can't know our fate. If you want, so I'll use fate as saying the reality of the end of your life, not in any kind of determined spiritual way, but just that what will happen. We don't know what will happen. So trying in any way to predict it or avoid it is impossible, because you can't avoid something you don't know. Yeah, it's very interesting. And this is where I think we are supposed to feel McCarthy's optimism, his pushback against the judge's relentless fatalism and philosophy of war. One of the judge's most famous quotes is, "War is God." But this is where I think we can see that McCarthy is pushing back against this idea of manifest destiny, or genocide, violence, pushing back against the idea that those things are the destiny of humans, the human's ultimate form. The judge says, "I tell you this, as war becomes dishonored and its nobility called into question, those honorable men who recognize the sanctity of blood will become excluded from the dance, which is the warrior's right, and thereby will the dance become a false dance, and the dancers false dancers. And yet there will be one there always who is a true dancer, and can you guess who that might be?" And the kid says, "You ain't nothing." The judge says, "You speak truer than you know, but I will tell you. Only that man who has offered up himself entire to the blood of war, who has been to the floor of the pit and seen horror in the round, and learned at last that it speaks to his inmost heart, only that man can dance. Even a dumb animal can dance." The judge compares war, eternal conflict, to a dance. And he's saying as society progresses, as we look less fondly upon war, there will be people who claim to follow this philosophy, but they'll be false, but there'll still be one. And he says who that one might be, he asks the kid, and the kid says, "You ain't nothing." And I think that is the moment that the kid refutes this philosophy, or the man, right? Even the judge says, "You speak truer than you know." But even as the judge claims that war is man's ultimate practice, and that it speaks to a man's inmost heart, the kid says, "Even a dumb animal can dance." It doesn't take anything to kill and to hurt people. And I think that's a really beautiful, it's a very small, this whole book is so bleak and disturbing, but this to me is like the point that McCarthy's getting at. Even a dumb animal can dance, right? You ain't nothing. This is the last passage of the book. Well, there's an epilogue, but this is the last passage of the main part of the book. And, well, I'll just read it. "And they are dancing, the board floor slamming under the jackboots, and the fiddlers grinning hideously over their canted pieces. Towering over them all is the judge, and he is naked, dancing, his small feet lively and quick, and now in double time, and bowing to the ladies, huge and pale and hairless like an enormous infant. He never sleeps, he says. He says he'll never die. He bows to the fiddlers and sashays backwards and throws back his head and laughs deep in his throat, and he is a great favorite, the judge. He wafts his hat, and the lunar dome of his skull passes palely under the lamps, and he swings about and takes possession of one of the fiddles, and he pirouettes and makes a pass, 2 passes, dancing and fiddling at once. His feet are light and nimble. He never sleeps. He says that he will never die. He dances in light and in shadow, and he is a great favorite. He never sleeps, the judge. He is dancing, dancing. He says that he will never die. So again, with the dance analogy to war, we end with the judge literally dancing. And he's loved by everybody. They accept him. And that's, again, as I said before, he has this uncanny ability to get people to follow him. The book ends, big spoiler here, the book ends with the judge killing the kid, or the man, because he won't follow his philosophy. And so that's kind of the dark twist of McCarthy's ray of hope, is that you can fight back against this overwhelming darkness, but you probably won't survive. Again, the world is an unkind place, but I still think, it's weird to say that ending is optimistic, but the kid dies fighting for his philosophy, that there is something worth holding on to beyond violence and killing. Okay, well that's all the quotes I have. Again, this is probably my favorite book. I want to know what you guys, if you've read this book, what you think about it. What you think about any of my quotes that I chose. I think there's so much to talk about with this book, and so if you want a more in-depth video on certain aspects, I would love to do that. I really don't get tired of talking about this book, and I'm probably going to read it again fairly soon. Thank you again for watching. Thank you for those who commented on my other video. I'm not sure if I'm going to have Ulysses done by next weekend. It's just a monster of a book. But there's so much to talk about with it. I'm really excited. I'm really enjoying it. Please, if you like this video, like it, comment, subscribe. I don't like saying all that YouTuber stuff, but here we are. So thank you again, and I'll see you next time. See you later.